Okay, so for anybody who isn't a complete stranger to the new wave of DCEU movies that we've been receiving, the tone of these movies have been generally a lot darker, both in terms of color palette and in terms of like actual story narrative as well. Even characters like Superman, who are generally very happy, very smiley characters, have been kind of reduced to like a slightly more um, dark and just like less, I guess, cheery versions of themselves. And of course, this is very evident with Batman. Now, Batman, of course, with some exceptions, has never really been like a super cheery character when it comes to his depictions in media. I think people generally know that he's not a the smiling type. And in the new movie, we kind of get more of a feel for this. It manages to go even darker than like the Christopher Nolan films. The depiction we get of the Riddler is a pretty interesting take. A little more like incel school shooter type vibes than I think I would ever ideally place in a version of the Riddler that I would make. But the Riddler is my favorite comic book character, and I think the adaptation that they gave him was pretty good. And most importantly for the movie, it allowed Batman to kind of focus more so on his detective aspects, which is something that we didn't quite see as much in the Christopher Nolan. And I hope it's something that they can kind of maintain going forward. Because first and foremost, Batman is a detective. He's first introduced in Detective Comics #1. So it would just be an interesting, a take on the character if we just see him to continue to go down this path that we really haven't seen him it take on in like recent or even like historically in like live action movies. But that being said, I am a big fan of the direction that the Batman has taken. And as such, I kind of wanted to discuss who I think would be like a prime character to introduce in the next Batman film. And a character who I think would really add a lot and could be both very like versatile in how you can implement him and like what he can really do for both the Batman lore for the movie series and for the DCEU as a whole. And that character is Clayface. Now, when I was originally thinking of this video, making the script and getting the pictures together, I hadn't realized that there actually has been like some pretty heavy rumors around the idea that Clayface will be one of the major villains in the next movie. Which after I read that, I was like, oh, maybe making this video is a lot less important because I'm not really coming up with something novel here, which is a little unfortunate. But I already had the script, I already had the pictures. I figured may as well still talk about it. Now, as for why exactly I think Clayface would be good for this version of Batman, there's a few things to consider. First of all, there are maybe two major versions of Clayface that are worth exploring, both of which I think could be adapted pretty well into a Batman live action movie, and characters that we've never actually seen before, which is kind of surprising. Um, so one would be like a more reserved and like closer to the original version of Clayface, where we saw Clayface was just a guy, Basil Carlo, who is like a famous actor, and he is capable of like changing his face to equal or like appear like anybody else, right? And then in the more modern interpretation, we have a version of Clayface where he's like a man that's made out of clay or like mud, and he's capable of shape shifting both to look like other people's, but also just to make his arms into weapons and really like just be like a physical threat as well. So the first interpretation, I think, is one that could work pretty well with the way that the movies have been going. And if they do include Clayface, I assume it'll probably be more of this classic version where it's kind of just a guy who can control his appearance. And here I can kind of imagine we can get something kind of similar to what we've seen with like the Chameleon a few times, where he's impersonating Batman as the Chameleon would impersonate Spider-Man, right? Just impersonating the respective hero, going around dishing out their own like vigilante justice in the case of Clayface, maybe going around killing criminals. And of course, Batman would have fault with this, or it would not be a big fan of somebody who looks like him going around killing people. And it may also increase the pressure of like the Gotham Police Department to like put more pressure into trying to arrest Batman because he's going around killing the criminals of Gotham. And even then, you could explore some interesting aspects where you can have like the people of Gotham who, honestly, I think we don't generally get to see as often as we really should. And how they interpret like the way Batman has been going. Some of them maybe like thinking, this like level of vigilante justice, this killing of criminals, this is something we need. There's so much corruption in the Gotham Police Department, which is again something that could be very interesting to explore, because that is something that historically has been a pretty big problem in Gotham, is the corruption among the police. And in that way, Clayface could be a very interesting. He could have a very interesting dynamic with Batman and the rest of like the Batman verse in Gotham. Really, just give us an idea as to how people feel about the police, crime and punishment in general, and then it can become like this almost philosophical thing where is it even right to stop this guy? Is killing maybe the right way to go? Which obviously with Batman we're probably going to end up with the answer like no, killing is wrong. But we can really I think there's a lot of potential for exploring this. And now with a slightly more I guess like supernatural version of Clayface, we can have the full Clayface who's still capable of transforming his appearance, but is also like a bit of a physical threat. And with his impersonation, it doesn't have to be Batman. He can also maybe impersonate somebody close to Batman, like maybe Harvey Dent, and then Batman can kind of be seeing his friend go through like this phase where he's like become much more violent, not acting characteristically how he would expect, but Batman may not come to the conclusion like, oh, obviously he's been replaced by a doppelganger, because as it stands, with the version of the Batman that we've seen, he hasn't really encountered too much like super or anything really supernatural, and that could be a really nice, like, I guess, humble introduction of Batman into like the world of the supernatural, right? Where he's like exploring this case, and he's like, the evidence is pointing to something otherworldly, like something I wouldn't expect, but like he's a man of science who doesn't really believe in like mystical or supernatural things. And then eventually, he comes to the conclusion like, maybe this is just how it is. Like Clayface is a real thing. It's just something I have to deal with. And that could be like an interesting dynamic for him. I think it could serve as like a good branching point that can kind of get this more grounded version of Batman in line, and like, introduce him well to like the other members of the Justice League, if that's the direction they end up taking, because we are getting the new James Gunn Superman movie, we are getting more DCEU movies coming up, and eventually, if we're gonna have a Justice League movie, we're gonna need to have a Batman in that Justice League. And I think having a supernatural form of Clayface can kind of like be a nice way to get Batman from that gritty realism into that more like supernatural fun world of comics that he's gonna probably need to be a part of eventually, as opposed to just going straight from being a detective to being thrown into these like supernatural, weirdly like superpowered people, and like having to interact with them, which could be like a bit of a shock if we don't have like that movie that kind of transitions him nicely into it. And in my mind, that's kind of probably the best use of Clayface. And it's also worth exploring, Clayface is a character that can really work well with other characters as well. I've heard people say that Clayface only works well with other characters and he can't really be his own standalone villain. And I think I disagree with that. I think from the cases I presented, with the more detective-focused Batman, it could work very well where Clayface is like the only major antagonist. I guess like along with maybe the Gotham Police Department in some sense. But other characters, I think he could work pretty well with would be, other, I guess, like lesser known and like lesser popular Batman characters. Of course, I'm not saying like, Scarecrow isn't a super popular Batman character. He definitely is, but we don't see him adapted as much as a character like, you say, the Joker. But the Scarecrow, Penguin, those types of characters who aren't really much of like a physical threat, they can kind of work pretty well with Clayface, I think, where Clayface can kind of bounce off them pretty well as well. Do his like disguise shenanigans, kind of mess with Batman, make him start to doubt like which way it goes. Especially, it feels like a pairing with the Scarecrow could be pretty nice. Hard to really even separate what's real and what's not. And then if you add like the supernatural man who's made out of clay and is able to like rearrange his body, like it could be like a very interesting dynamic there as well. And even with like some lesser known and like among the scarier of Batman villains, like, Victor Zsasz or Professor Pig, if we want to go that more dark, gritty serial killer route, I could also see Clayface working well as support characters for those types of villains as well. So, again, a little unfortunate that halfway through my research, I came to the realization that Clayface is almost definitely going to be the villain in the next Batman movie. Even still, I just wanted to get my thoughts out on this. I think this is like a fun format. I just enjoy talking about comic books and how I would adapt them to movies. So probably going to come out with more videos like this in the future. But aside from that, that's all I've got for this one.